The land after summer does not speak in color, it speaks in dust. Beyond the walls of Jerusalem, the hills lie pale and scoured, their stones showing through thin skins of grass burned away by months without rain. Wind moves low across them, lifting grit from old paths and setting it down again without pattern. At dawn, the air carries little sound. Even birds hesitate. Only the slow shifting of heat against stone, the faint scrape of leather where a tethered animal shifts its weight, the dry cough of earth settling after night. Within the city, the morning arrives by degrees. Shade still clings to the narrow streets, trapped between walls that were laid by hands long dead. Water drawn from cisterns tastes of lime and age. Doors open carefully. People move without haste, because haste has learned to draw attention. The city has lived too long under watchful skies to forget that quiet is a form of shelter. Balian of Ibelin walks early, before the sun reaches the high points of the Temple Mount. His steps are measured, neither hurried nor slow. He has walked these streets as a child, as a lord, as a man dispossessed and returned. Now he walks as something less clear. He wears no crest that would announce him. The leather of his boots is cracked from travel. Dust clings to the hem of his cloak. He looks, as he often does, like a man who has not yet decided whether he belongs where he stands. He passes a stone trough where a woman rinses lentils, her hands red from cold water drawn before dawn. He passes a baker already at work, sweat darkening the linen at his neck though the day has barely begun. The city does not pause for him. It rarely has. Jerusalem has learned to outlast the men who claim it. Responsibility finds him not in a council chamber but at a gate. The city's defenses are thin, their garrison thinner still. Men stand with spears that have been mended more times than replaced, wood patched into iron, leather straps knotted where they should be stitched. Balian does not count them. He knows their number by the weight that settles in his chest each time he looks. He did not come to Jerusalem seeking command. His intention had been narrower, almost private, to escort his family, to fulfill an obligation to blood and name, to leave again if leaving were permitted. But intention dissolves quickly when the city presses its needs into a man's hands. Word travels through Jerusalem the way water moves through cracked stone, slowly, invisibly, until it breaks the surface all at once. News of Hattin has already done its work. The defeat is not spoken of openly, but its shape is everywhere. In the absence of men who should be here, in the armor hanging unused, in the way children are kept close, no longer sent beyond sight to play. Balian feels the city leaning toward him before anyone says his name. Not because he is the strongest or the most certain, but because he remains. Others have gone, others have been taken. Remaining becomes its own authority. He understands, with a clarity that brings no comfort, that ambition would be easier than responsibility. Ambition would allow him to imagine outcomes shaped to desire. Responsibility offers only what must be done, stripped of promise. The city is not a single body. It is a system of breath and labor, of roots worn smooth by feet carrying water, grain, messages, fear. Markets open because hunger does not wait for war to resolve itself. The butcher weighs meat with care, knowing there will be no resupply if the roads are cut. Merchants count coins more slowly, testing their worth as if the metal itself might have changed overnight. Justice does not disappear, even as its voice grows quieter. Disputes over property, over debts, over insults still come before men empowered to judge them. The judgments are shorter now. There is less patience for argument. Survival sharpens decisions. Outside the walls, the roads that once brought pilgrims now carry only uncertainty. Dust plumes rise and vanish again. Riders appear at distance and resolve into nothing. Each road becomes a question without an answer. Balian spends his days moving between these systems, not directing them so much as listening to where they strain. He stands with those who measure grain, who allocate water, who decide which sections of wall can still be trusted. He learns the city again, not as a place of prayer or inheritance, but as an organism that can fail one part at a time. There is disorder, but it is contained, held in check by habit and by fear. People still line up at wells, still sweep the thresholds of their homes, still light lamps at dusk. These small acts form a barrier as real as stone. The threat beyond the walls does not rush. It gathers. Reports arrive of banners seen and gone again, of camps razed and dismantled. Saladin's presence is felt more as pressure than as motion, like weather that announces itself by changing the air. When the first true confrontation comes, it is limited and restrained. A probing force tests the defenses. Arrows fall not in storms but in careful intervals. The city responds without frenzy. Men hold their positions. Orders are simple. Do not pursue. Do not waste strength. Do not answer insult with pride. Balian feels the urge to strike harder to prove that the city still has teeth. He lets the urge pass. Restraint is not passivity. It is calculation shaped by care for those who will bear the cost. A decision settles among the city's leaders, spoken first in fragments, then aloud. Negotiation is no longer a sign of weakness. It is the only remaining instrument that can preserve what matters. Balian understands what this will mean. To speak not as a conqueror or a supplicant, but as a custodian arguing for the lives entrusted to him. Rules begin to take shape where none had been written before. Who may leave the city and under what protection? How provisions will be distributed if the gates close? What authority remains to command labor, to requisition goods, to compel service? Each rule is narrow. Each carries the risk of resentment. Without them, the city will fracture along lines older than its walls. Stability comes not through victory but through repetition. Days pass. The same routes are walked. The same watches kept. The same prayers rise and fall. The absence of spectacle becomes its own kind of achievement. The cost of leadership accumulates quietly. Balian sleeps less. When he does sleep, he dreams of walls that crumble without sound. He sees faces that expect answers he cannot give. Loss arrives not as death alone, but as the slow erosion of certainty. He thinks often of those who will live after these days, whether under new rulers or old names reshaped. The city has known many hands. It will know more. When authority is finally spoken of as something to be transferred rather than defended, Balian does not resist the thought. He prepares himself to become, again, a man in motion rather than command. The work is to ensure that what passes on is not only control but structure. As the season shifts, a thin green returns to the hills beyond the walls, fragile and easily missed. The wind carries a different scent, still dry but no longer empty. Jerusalem stands, not triumphant, not defeated, held together by choices made in restraint. The stone remembers footsteps longer than it remembers names. And power, when it endures at all, does so by yielding its shape to the lives it shelters. The wind changes first. It no longer moves as a single breath across the hills, but arrives in uneven currents, slipping through valleys and lifting the smell of damp soil where the ground has begun, cautiously, to soften. Autumn does not announce itself with abundance. It tests the land with restraint, offering only the promise that heat will not dominate forever. Along the outer slopes beyond Jerusalem, thin shoots appear between stones, fragile enough to vanish under a careless boot. Inside the walls, the city adjusts without ceremony. Cloaks grow heavier. Fires are lit earlier in the evenings, fed sparingly, the wood stacked and restacked as if counting itself. Smoke drifts upward and breaks apart against the sky, leaving no clear trace of where it began. Jerusalem has learned not to leave evidence of its inner life. Balian's days are now shaped by interruption. He is summoned while walking, while eating, while standing alone with his thoughts. Responsibility no longer waits for readiness. It arrives wherever he happens to be and insists on attention. He carries no written authority that could be displayed and cited. What he carries instead is a pattern of decisions that others have begun to trust, not because they inspire confidence, but because they hold. The city's needs have shifted. Food remains a concern, but fear has begun to take on structure. It is no longer diffuse. It gathers around specific questions. What will happen when Saladin comes in full strength? Who will speak for the city when speaking becomes unavoidable? Whether mercy can be negotiated, or whether it is something granted only after resistance has been exhausted. Balian listens more than he speaks. He learns which men demand certainty and which can endure ambiguity. He notes who argues for honor and who argues for survival, and how often these are not the same voices. He understands that the city cannot be carried by ideals alone. It must be carried by systems that continue to function when belief falters. Markets now open under watch. Measures are checked twice. Prices are spoken softly, without flourish. A man who cheats today risks not profit but exclusion tomorrow. Social bonds tighten, not out of affection but necessity. Even mistrust becomes organized. The roads beyond the walls are quieter than before. Not empty but controlled. Movement is deliberate. Riders are allowed through only with escort, only with reason. Each gate becomes a site of judgment. Each opening and closing marks time as clearly as the sun. The presence of Ayyubid authority begins to take form at a distance. Not as chaos, not as indiscriminate violence, but as order moving forward. Camps are established with precision. Supplies arrive regularly. Patrols rotate. This is not an army driven by hunger or haste. It is an instrument designed to endure. Balian recognizes this, and the recognition steadies him. Disorder can be resisted with force. Order must be met with understanding. When contact finally becomes unavoidable, it is formal, almost restrained. Envoys move between camps and walls, their passage marked by flags rather than weapons. Messages are carried carefully, as if words themselves might break if handled roughly. Terms are not yet offered, only intentions, only the outline of what will be demanded. The city responds by clarifying its own position, not in public declaration, but through preparation. Lists are made of those unable to fight. Plans are drawn for evacuation that may never occur. The churches and hospitals are inventoried, their contents weighed not in value, but in usefulness. Gold becomes less important than cloth, oil, and grain. Balian feels the pressure of decision tightening. To delay is to risk being overtaken by events. To act too soon is to foreclose possibilities not yet revealed. He chooses a middle path that satisfies no one completely. Talks continue. Defenses are maintained. The city neither submits nor provokes. Violence flickers at the edges. A skirmish here, an exchange of arrows there. Each is brief, contained, stripped of spectacle. The dead are counted quietly. Burials occur before nightfall. There are no speeches. The loss is absorbed and carried forward like added weight. In these moments, Balian's restraint is tested most sharply. Each death presses against him as a personal failure. He resists the temptation to answer loss with escalation. Retaliation would offer clarity, but at a cost the city cannot pay. Rules become firmer. Curfews are enforced. Labor is assigned rather than requested. Some resent this. Others are relieved. Authority, once informal, now takes on edges. Balian feels those edges cut into his own sense of self. He has become a point through which obligation flows. Time passes not in days but in repeated actions. The gates open and close. Watch changes hands. Bread is baked. The sick are tended. Children are taught to keep their voices low without being told why. Aging reveals itself in posture and pace. At night, Balian stands on the walls and watches the distant lights of the Ayyubid camp. They are steady, numerous, orderly. He does not imagine their thoughts. He considers only their permanence. He understands that whatever follows will not erase what has been built here. The systems forming under pressure will persist, reshaped perhaps, but not undone. The city is learning to survive transition. As the wind carries the first real chill into Jerusalem, it also carries a lesson made visible in the land itself. Structures that bend endure longer than those that resist without measure. Rain arrives without warning, not the kind that cleans but the kind that tests. It falls unevenly, tapping stone in some quarters and missing others entirely, leaving the city mottled with damp and dryness. Water runs along grooves worn deep by centuries of feet and wheels, collecting briefly before vanishing into cistern mouths cut with careful angles. The ground drinks slowly. Nothing here is built for excess. The hills beyond Jerusalem darken in patches. Where the soil is shallow, the rain leaves no mark. Where it gathers, it releases the scent of iron and old roots. Movement becomes cautious. Paths that were reliable turn slick. Every step asks for attention. Within the walls, the change alters rhythm more than mood. People linger longer indoors. Work is compressed into shorter hours of light. The city does not slow, but it tightens, drawing its activity inward. The sound of rain on stone becomes a shared measure of time. Balian's authority is now unmistakable, though still undefined. Men wait for his word before acting, then act as if the decision had always been theirs. He feels this shift not as elevation, but as enclosure. Each choice narrows the space available for the next. The question of negotiation presses closer. Messages from the Ayyubid camp grow more precise. Courtesy remains, but patience thins. The city is given to understand that its fate will be decided soon, one way or another. Not as a threat but as a statement of process. Balian weighs the city's condition without illusion. The walls can still be held for a time, not indefinitely. Supplies can be stretched, not replenished. Morale is stable but fragile. It rests on routine, not confidence. A single failure could fracture it. He begins to prepare the city for concession without naming it as such. Discussions shift subtly. Talk of defense is paired with talk of terms. Honor is spoken of less as defiance and more as protection. Language adapts before action does. The systems he has nurtured are tested. Grain distribution must be adjusted to account for longer confinement. Water access is regulated more tightly. Certain wells are reserved, their locations known only to a few. Labor on the walls becomes continuous, rotating through exhaustion rather than waiting for it. Justice grows heavier. Punishments are enforced swiftly, not harshly but without delay. Theft cannot be indulged. Panic cannot be allowed to spread. Each judgment reinforces the understanding that the city still governs itself, even under pressure. The first formal terms are presented. They are not yet final, but they reveal the shape of what is coming. Safe passage in exchange for surrender, lives spared at a price, freedom measured in coin and compliance. The offer is structured, impersonal. It reflects a system confident in its leverage. Balian receives the terms without visible reaction. Inside, he feels the strain of opposing obligations. To resist would affirm pride but risk annihilation. To accept too readily would fracture trust within the city. He chooses delay again, but this time with purpose. Delay becomes a tool to prepare minds rather than defenses. Violence intrudes briefly, sharply. A group attempts to leave the city without sanction. They are stopped at the gate. There is struggle. Blood falls on stone already darkened by rain. The incident is contained, but its echo spreads. The city sees what disorder looks like and does not want more of it. Balian responds not with force but with clarity. Movement is further restricted. Exceptions are formalized. What was once negotiated case by case is now governed by rule. The rules are narrow, but they hold. At night the rain eases. The wind carries the smell of wet wood and ash. Fires burn lower. The city sleeps unevenly, alert even in rest. Balian does not sleep at all. He walks the walls again, his cloak heavy with damp, his thoughts fixed on the space between resistance and survival. He begins to understand that negotiation is not a single act, but a process of shaping laws. The question is no longer whether the city will change hands, but how much of itself it can carry forward through the change. As days pass, the rain returns and recedes, returns and recedes. Each cycle leaves the stone a little darker, the air a little colder. The city endures by adjusting its grip rather than tightening it. In this, Balian senses the deeper pattern at work. Authority that cannot adapt breaks. Authority that yields with intention leaves something standing when the pressure lifts. The rain thins into mist. It lingers in the early hours, clinging to low ground and to the hollows between buildings, softening outlines without erasing them. Stone darkened by weeks of moisture begins to pale again as the sun returns, cautious and angled. The season turns not by declaration but by accumulation, fewer insects, shorter shadows. Breath visible at dawn. Jerusalem absorbs these changes with practiced indifference. Life resumes its outward rhythms while keeping its inward guard. Doors remain barred longer in the mornings. Children are kept close, given tasks instead of games. The city does not wait for resolution. It trains itself to exist inside uncertainty. Balian's role shifts again, almost imperceptibly. He is no longer only the one who responds. He becomes the one who anticipates. Requests reach him already shaped, already narrowed, as if those who bring them know what answers are possible and which are not. This familiarity weighs on him more than open conflict would have. Negotiation advances by increments. Envoys return with refinements, not reversals. Numbers are adjusted, conditions clarified. What is being built between the city and the Ayyubid command is not mercy alone, but a framework for transfer. Authority preparing to hand itself over without collapsing. Balian studies the structure behind the offers. He notes how carefully they are limited, how little is left to chance. Safe conduct is defined. Ransom is standardized. The movement of people is planned in stages, not allowed to surge. This is not conquest by chaos. It is absorption by order. He mirrors this structure within the city. Registers are compiled of those who will require protection. Craftsmen are identified by skill rather than loyalty. Clerics are consulted not for inspiration, but for record. The city begins to catalog itself, reducing its own complexity so it can be carried across the threshold that approaches. Some resist this transformation. A few argue that surrender erases meaning, that survival purchased by submission is already a form of death. Their words are heard, but they do not spread. The city has lived long enough to know that meaning takes many shapes, and that endurance is one of them. Violence recedes rather than escalates. The Ayyubid lines hold steady. The walls are not tested again. This absence of pressure is its own signal. Time is being granted, not out of generosity, but out of confidence. Balian recognizes the message and accepts its terms without acknowledging it aloud. The moral weight of his position deepens. He must now decide not only how to protect life, but whose expectations will be disappointed. Every path forward excludes some vision of justice. He chooses the path that preserves the most bodies, the most skills, the most continuity. It is not a choice that inspires loyalty. It is a choice that sustains function. Institutional habits begin to detach from his presence. Orders are executed without his direct involvement. Systems he shaped now operate on their own momentum. This both relieves and unsettles him. Authority, once necessary, is becoming replaceable. He spends more time alone, walking the quieter sections of the city, standing near cistern mouths, listening to the water settle after being drawn, touching the stone of walls whose strength he has measured and found wanting. These gestures do not change outcomes. They prepare him to accept them. As arrangements near completion, the language of leadership shifts again. The future is no longer described in terms of defense or negotiation, but of transition. What will be taken? What will be left? What will continue under different hands? Continuity becomes the final objective. The city senses this before it is declared. Movement becomes deliberate. Possessions are sorted. Some are abandoned, some are hidden, some are prepared for transport. The work is quiet, methodical, almost reverent. The city is packing itself. Balian understands that his greatest task is nearly finished, not because the danger has passed, but because the structure needed to meet it now exists independent of him. His authority has done what it was meant to do. It has made room for its own disappearance. As the mist lifts and the sun settles into its lower arc, Jerusalem stands altered but intact. The road ahead is no longer uncertain in direction, only in experience, and stability, once improvised, has become a bridge rather than a shelter. Cold settles into the stone. It does not announce itself with frost, but with persistence. Walls hold the night longer now. Steps echo differently in the early hours, sharper, as if sound itself has tightened. The wind no longer carries dust. It carries the faint smell of damp wool, of smoke clinging to courtyards where fires burn low and constant. Jerusalem moves with care. The city has entered the phase where preparation outweighs reaction. What can be decided has been decided. What remains is execution, repetition, and endurance. People begin to measure time by tasks completed rather than days remaining. Balian feels the narrowing of his role. Decisions still come to him, but fewer of them alter the course already set. He approves lists, confirms routes, settles disputes that arise from fear rather than injustice. His authority is now administrative, heavy with detail. It demands attention but offers no illusion of control. The terms, when they are finalized, arrive without drama. They are read, copied, confirmed. Their language is spare, almost indifferent. It does not describe victory or defeat. It describes process. Who may leave, who may stay, what may be carried, what must be surrendered. The city is reduced to categories, its people to numbers that can be managed. Balian studies the terms until they lose their sharpness. He looks for hidden edges and finds few. This, too, unsettles him. A clean structure leaves little room for appeal. He begins the work of explanation, not through proclamation but through presence. He stands at gates while rules are enforced. He walks with those tasked to organize departure. He listens to anger without answering it. The city does not need persuasion now. It needs confirmation that the plan will hold. Some choose to leave, others choose to remain. The choice is shaped by age, by trade, by memory. Families divide themselves along lines drawn by necessity. Each departure is orderly, but none are easy. The road that once carried pilgrims outward now carries households stripped to what can be borne. Balian watches these movements with a sense of erosion. Each group that passes the gate takes with it a portion of the city he has known. Yet the movement itself is proof that the system functions. People leave alive. They leave protected. The road holds. Within the walls, those who remain begin to adapt to the idea of new authority, not with loyalty but with calculation. They ask practical questions. What taxes will be required? Which courts will hear disputes? How labor will be assigned? These questions signal not submission but continuity, life preparing to persist. Violence does not erupt. This absence feels unnatural at first, like a held breath that never releases. Then it becomes normal. Order replaces tension not because fear has vanished, but because it has been organized. The internal cost of these days accumulates in Balion's body. His hands shake slightly when he is still. His temper shortens, then reins itself in again. He eats little. He rests without sleeping. The burden he carries has shifted from urgency to weight. He is called less often by name and more often by role. This change distances him from his own actions. Authority becomes something that passes through him rather than belonging to him. He accepts this without protest. It is the final discipline of leadership. As the days shorten further, the city grows quieter. Empty houses are sealed. Courtyards fall silent. The sound of footsteps thins. What remains is not absence but compression. Jerusalem has drawn itself inward, concentrating what life remains behind closed doors and within narrow streets. Balian begins to prepare for his own withdrawal, not departure but diminution. He ensures that records are complete, that obligations are documented, that promises made by him can be traced and honored by those who follow. He removes himself from decisions that no longer require his judgment. He understands now that leadership does not end with resolution. It ends with transfer. Anything less leaves a vacuum that invites disorder. On the walls, the watch continues. Fires burn at measured intervals. Beyond them, the Ayyubid presence remains steady, unchanged. The two orders face each other without hostility, linked by agreements rather than weapons. The city stands between them, altered in shape but not erased. And Balian, standing within it, feels the approach of an ending that is not an end, but a release of hold. Morning returns to Jerusalem without color. Light settles briefly on the upper stones of the walls and then withdraws, leaving the city suspended between night and day. The air is still enough that smoke from the first fires rises straight before thinning and dissolving. The silence is not empty. It is deliberate, shaped by weeks of anticipation. The gates stand closed a little longer than usual, not from hesitation, but from habit. Men assigned to them check hinges and bars one final time, hands moving from memory rather than instruction. Wood that has held through siege and threat creaks softly, as if aware that its purpose is about to change. Balian waits nearby, not at the center of attention, not withdrawn either. He stands where movement converges, where responsibility once pooled and now begins to drain away. His cloak is heavy from use, its edges worn smooth by stone. He does not look toward the hills. He watches the ground, the threshold, the place where one order gives way to another. When the gates finally open, they do so without signal. Iron slides free. The sound carries briefly, then fades into the stone behind it. No cheer follows, no cry of warning. The opening feels less like surrender than like release, as if pressure long held has been allowed to pass through rather than explode. The road beyond accepts the first movement calmly. Those leaving do so in measured groups, spaced carefully, watch closely but not hurried. Children clutch bundles tied too large for their arms. Older men walk without turning back. The city does not pull at them. It lets them go. Ayyubid authority enters in the same manner, not as a wave, not as a spectacle, but as alignment. Standards appear where they are expected. Officials step forward with tablets and ledgers. Their work begins immediately, focused not on conquest but on accounting. Who stands where? What remains? What must be secured? Balian observes the process with a practiced eye. He looks for signs of strain, for gestures that might provoke fear or resentment. He finds few. Order meets order. The city's preparation answers the newcomer's method. Systems recognize systems. He realizes with a quiet finality that his presence is no longer necessary. Instructions pass around him rather than through him. Questions are directed elsewhere. This does not wound him. It confirms what he has been working toward. Authority that clings too long becomes obstruction. He walks the streets again, slower now, past houses sealed and marked. Past courtyards where water jars stand covered, waiting for hands that may never return. The city feels altered but intact, like a vessel that has been emptied without being broken. At a cistern he pauses. The water below reflects only stone and shadow. It does not reflect him. He takes this as a sign, though he does not name it as such. Loss emerges gradually. Not as grief that overwhelms, but as absence that accumulates. Familiar voices do not answer. Certain routes are quieter than they should be, yet the city breathes. Markets reopen in smaller measure. Labor resumes under new oversight. Continuity asserts itself without ceremony. Fatigue settles into Balian's body fully now. His shoulders ache with a weight no longer required. His thoughts slow, no longer pulled in multiple directions. For the first time in months, nothing demands immediate resolution. He attends to final obligations. Records are confirmed. Promises are restated in writing. Those who must know where to turn after he leaves are shown, carefully, without emphasis. He does not give instruction on how to remember him. That is not his task. When he prepares to depart, it is done quietly. No gathering marks the moment. No final inspection. The city has already moved beyond the need for his presence. He carries little with him. What mattered most was never portable. Outside the walls, the land opens again. The road stretches forward, pale and firm. Wind moves across the hills, lifting dust and setting it down elsewhere, indifferent to banners and borders. It has done this before. It will do so again. Balian does not look back immediately. When he does, the city stands as it always has, layered with memory, altered by each passing authority yet unchanged in its endurance. Walls catch the light. Shadows settle. Life continues within them. He turns away without ceremony. The work he was given has been completed not by victory but by restraint, not by force but by structure. Behind him, Jerusalem remains, held not by the will of one man but by the habits that outlast men. Ahead of him, the road waits, unmarked by name or claim. The land does not record who ruled it. It records only whether it was broken or preserved.